What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Ben the Jeep Guy. I know it's been a little while since we've seen each other, but I got a really cool project that I'm going to start on, and this is going to be a build series. So there's going to be multiple videos on this project. And this is kind of one of the reasons why you haven't seen me put too many videos up lately, because I've just been very busy trying to get to this point. Plus, 2020 was just awful. I think we can all say that, but I just didn't get a whole lot of Jeep stuff done this year. There wasn't a lot of urgency to get a lot of projects tied up just because COVID shut down all the fun events. So this year just wasn't a priority Jeep year for our family. So I spent a lot of the year trying to come up with how I'm going to pull off this project. So stick with me. This is going to be episode 1 of this build series, and there's going to be just a lot of information that I'm going to give you guys about this project. So if you came here today expecting to see me install something, unfortunately, that's not what I'm going to be doing today, but I hope you guys will stick around and check out what I got in store for you, because I think you're really going to like it. So without further ado, over here on my table, I have a few of the items that kind of give you the overall picture of what we're about to do. So let's check it out. All right. On the table, I have a few of the components that will help us get a visual for what we're doing here. In this box, I have a Dana 44 axle. Now, I'm sure you're probably thinking, Ben, there's no way a whole axle fits in that box. And you're right, because it's not a whole axle. So let's take a look. God, this thing is heavy. Okay. Here we have the center section for a Dana 44. And I know you're thinking, Ben, you're missing a whole lot. And you're right. So this is a Dana 44 center section from a TJ/LJ Rubicon model Dana 44 front axle. And the reason I chose to build one of these is this, in its stock form, is a direct bolt-in axle solution for my XJ. Now, before you guys start flaming me in the comment section, saying there's so many better axles, you're right. There is a better set of axles out there, and they're called JK Rubicon Dana 44 axles. That is a much better path to build a set of Dana 44 axles for my XJ. So why didn't I do that? Well, one, the used market usually says that they're about $4,000. Sometimes people find them for cheaper. Here in Georgia, that's pretty much the going rate for even a bone stock set of JK axles with nothing done to them. They're about $4,000 for a set of used axles. I don't have $4,000. If I spent $4,000 on axles, my wife would divorce me. So why did I choose a Dana 44 axle? Well, a number of reasons. I went for the TJ version because, again, it's a direct bolt-in solution for my XJ. I already have an XJ rear Dana 44 axle out of an 87 XJ. It was a very rare option. Came in what they call the metric 1-ton towing package. There wasn't too much special about it other than the fact that it was a Dana 44, already set up for an XJ. And it actually is surprisingly similar in the way it's built to the conventional TJ Dana 44 rear axle. So a lot of the parts from a TJ or an LJ rear Dana 44 work in the XJ axle. So I've already built it up. And I have my money invested in that axle. The only thing that I haven't done to that axle is a locker. We'll get to that in a minute. So I wanted something to match what I've already invested money into. And I wanted to do the TJ and LJ front. Another reason why I wanted to do this is it matches both width and lug pattern. So the XJ is a 5 on 4.5 lug pattern, same as the TJ and the LJ. JK axles, on the other hand, are 5 on 5. So I would either have to run 2 different sets of axles, or I'd have to run adapters on the back and run the factory, just run it as factory with the front if I went with a JK front axle, but they would never match. And I don't know if I could find the right amount of spacers and that are also adapters it just got complicated. It just didn't make sense to do that. So I went and looked for a TJ LJ front axle. Now I did happen to find a used, completely bare housing, but unfortunately, before I could even make arrangements to get there, it sold. And I've been looking for that axle for a long, long time. I've only found a couple pop up that were actually used without too much done to them in stock form or bare housings. So I found this and I jumped on it. So I already have a local shop that said that they're very well versed in putting new axle tubes on it, because that's what I'm going to have to do. Is I'm going to have to put new axle tubes on it, put the inner seats on it, and put all new suspension brackets on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay the shop to do the axle tube portion, because that requires a very specific set of tools that would be very difficult to perform this kind of operation without. So I'd rather just let somebody with the proper tools and the proper experience put new tubes on it, because that's like the foundation of this entire build. You mess that up, you mess up everything. So the guy that I bought the center section from, it was a seller on eBay. He actually had the inner C's as well, so he hooked me up with a package. So I got the center section and the inner C's, and we're going to put new tubes on. And the guy that I talked to at the shop that's going to perform the retubing service is he's going to actually do a thicker wall tubing. So that'll be a little bit more comparable to what you could find in an aftermarket supplier. And I considered that too. I considered an aftermarket crate axle, but that's almost the cost of an entire set of used JK axles. They vary anywhere between $2,500 to $4,000 for a crate axle. Now, granted, it comes with, the axle shafts and gears, and you have a choice of locker, and it's great, and it's bolt-in, and yeah, that's an excellent solution, except for I don't have that kind of money. I'm driving XJ. XJ owners are known for being cheap, and I'm no exception to that rule. So this seems like a money-saving option, so that's why I'm pursuing this one as well. And again, like I said earlier, there are better axle options out there. JK axles that we've already talked about, or 1-tons. But again, that requires me to get new wheels and maybe even have to get a new set of tires, because I have 15-inch wheels, and I don't know if I could fit a 15-inch wheel over the brakes of a 1-ton axle or even over the JK brakes. So this will overall cost me less money than doing any of those other options. So that's why this one is the best for me. So now we've talked about how we're going to build it. What else are we going to do to it? Well, we're going to put a truss kit on it. We're going to put all new suspension brackets on it. And we're even going to get the inner C gussets for it that will weld on right here, that'll strengthen up these factory inner Cs. We're going to do thicker wall axle tubes that might tell us that maybe we don't need a truss, but I'm going to put a truss on it anyway, just for extra strength. And Barnes 4x4 sells not only just the truss, but they sell all new suspension brackets, and they actually sell it as one entire kit for the TJ LJ Dana 44. So that's what I'm going to buy. I'm going to get the suspension brackets from them, and they're made like factory with some improvements. So they improve the shock mount. They get rid of the bar pin. So that's kind of a nice improvement. And all of their suspension brackets are made of much thicker material. The factory suspension brackets are made of fairly thin material. Now, granted, there are things you can do to strengthen them a little bit, but ultimately, these ones from Barnes are going to be much more strong compared to the factory ones. So we're going to get a strength gain in that. We're going to get a strength gain from the thicker wall tubing. We're going to get a strength gain from the truss. So this is going to be the most bomb-proof version of a factory Dana 44 TJ LJ axle. So that's how we're going to build the housing. But what are we going to stuff it with? What's going to run inside this thing? Well, to start with, as far as the axle shafts themselves, I haven't really decided which direction I'm going to go. Chromoly axle shafts are pretty expensive. RCVs are very expensive, and I'm not taking those off the table as something that I would never put in there. I do want to consider those, but again, this is a budget build. So I'm going to spend the money on retubing. I'm going to spend the money on the truss kit and the suspension brackets and everything, but I'm going to possibly hold back on strength just a little bit and just see if I can find a set of used factory axle shafts and run those for a little bit, and then upgrade to chromoly or even RCVs a little later on down the road. So what about inside the differential? What are we going to run? We talked about lockers earlier, so let's talk about that. I looked around on the aftermarket, and whether you go with ARBs, whether you go with the Eaton electric lockers, whether you go with the Ox lockers, these are all selectable lockers. They're all very expensive. You're going to be looking at about $800 or more a piece. And if you run the Eatons, which are in the neighborhood of $800, you really don't have to run it other than a set of wires wired up and you're ready to go. If I wanted the ARBs, well, then I have to have a compressor, and then I got to run all the lines, and then it's a little bit more complicated. Those are the best of the best, though. And then the Ox locker. Well, Ox lockers, it's a nice locker. It's a cable-driven locker instead of air or electric powered. But again, because of it being cable-driven, it adds an extra element of complication with trying to figure out a way to get the actuating cable inside, and you have to have a lever. I didn't want to go that route either. So plus, it's just expensive. They're both very expensive. They're all very expensive. A cheaper route than going to selectable locker is an automatic locker. So we're talking something like a G80, Eaton locker. But those have their drawbacks. Then there's lunchbox lockers, which means I don't even have to fool with this kind of locker. I can use an open carrier, and they're automatic, but they're inexpensive, but they have some drawbacks too. Especially in a front axle, you tend to hear the ratcheting effect when they disconnect when you're trying to turn and drive on the streets. That's not what I wanted either. So, what is a cheap selectable locker? I went through this in my head and I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, JKs have Dana 44s, and I hear about people upgrading the factory electric lockers to like ARBs and stuff. So which means somebody's pulling the factory electric lockers out of JK axles. So maybe I could find a used set of lockers. And I did. And here they are. I found two from two different people. And I found them within about 60 days of each other. So this was a great option. But I had to also figure out, will they fit in this older housing? Because the JK axles are actually what they call next generation or second generation Dana 44s. They made some key changes in those axles, and I won't go through every last detail, but it made it so that this locker going in this older housing, questionable. So I started doing some research, and there's a guy named Carl Jantz of Jantz Engineering, and he manages to figure out how to put the JK ring and pinion set in an older Gen 1 or conventional housing. I won't get into all the differences, but it has a lot to do with carrier bearings and also the ring and pinion set. The ring and pinion, when you're talking about the rear axle from a JK, the ring gear is actually an 8.9-inch ring gear instead of the conventional 8.5-inch. The front axle still uses the 8.5-inch. They only increase the ring gear size on the rear axle for the JK. So I was starting to think, well, if the 8.5-inch ring gear fits on the front locker, then I'm thinking that maybe the 8.5-inch ring gear from an older conventional would fit on there too. Carl seems to believe it does because he's had a lot of experience mixing and matching different Dana series axle parts with other Dana series axles. So he's gotten really good at providing a kit to make the ring and pinion set from a JK rear axle fit in an older housing to get those strength advantages through that. So him and I have talked, and he believes it's possible, so I went ahead and purchased the lockers. Now, one other thing that I found out is the JK rear axle is a 32 spline axle. Well, conventional Dana 44s like this TJ axle or my XJ axle, they're 30 spline. That right there tells me I can't run that locker. But what I found out is that the front JK Dana 44, like sharing the same ring gear size, they share a spline count. So they are also 30 splines. So I found out that the front locker is a 30 spline in the JK Dana Dana 44. So I have two front lockers, and I've actually slid a spare axle shaft that I have for the XJ44 right in there. It perfectly engages the side gears inside the locker itself. So I know that will work. The question is, can I find a carrier bearing set that will work on this carrier and fit this housing? And I believe the factory size TJ, LJ, and even my XJ44 carrier bearings will fit on this locker. If that's the case, which I believe it is, then it should fit in this housing without issue. So that's what we're going to find out. I am going to be the guinea pig here because I haven't ever seen anybody do this, and I've scoured the internet to figure it out. So I would also like to take a second and just share some interesting information that I found out about these lockers too. This is just cool stuff. You can pass right past this, but I think it's interesting information. So Jeep does not make this locker. They actually subcontract or partner or buy, whatever you want to call it. They actually buy this locker from a company called GKN. I believe they're out of South Africa. And they make this locker for Jeep. Now, what I also figured out is that second generation or new generation Dana 44 that they came out with for the JK, well, that axle is actually found in Nissan vehicles too. So Nissan contracted with Dana Spicer and had them build some of their second generation Dana 44s for some of their vehicles. So you'll find a second generation rear Dana 44 in a Nissan Frontier, a Nissan Xterra, and the Nissan Titan. They make off-road versions of every single one of those models. And in those off-road platforms, they have an electric locker option. And this is the locker you find. So this is actually a plentiful locker. As all those vehicles get older, I'm sure we're going to see more and more and more of these come out. Now, those Nissan rear Dana 44 axles are the same 32 spline as the JK rear axle. So I wouldn't necessarily be able to use it for this project, but it's just really cool to know that they're out there. So I hope that one day that there's more parts available for these because you can actually disassemble these lockers. They don't offer any information out there on how to do that, but they can be opened up and you can pull the parts out of them. So hopefully as time goes on and those vehicles get older and more of them hit the junkyards, that even if you can't, if something's wrong with the case, you could pull the parts out of it. And if you found one of those 32 spline lockers and you found one with a good case, but you found a 30 spline locker and maybe something was wrong with the case or something, you could pull it apart, pull the side gears that are 30 spline out of those and put it into a 32 spline. So I'm hoping that this becomes a more popular thing, and either this is going to work or it's going to blow up in my face, and you guys are going to watch it here with me because I'm not going to hide that back from you. Either this is going to work and you're going to watch me be able to pull it off, or this is going to fail miserably and you guys and the rest of the world and the internet will know it. I'm going to be your guinea pig. So anyways, so that's going to be the overall build here. We're going to take a TJ LJ Dana 44. We're going to beef it up and build it from the ground up. We're going to put thicker axle tubes on it. We're going to put thicker suspension brackets on it. We're going to put a truss on it, and we're going to stuff, eventually we're going to stuff some chromoly or RCV axle shafts in it. We're going to start with the factory ones for now, and we're going to see if we can make this JK front locker fit not only in this front axle, but also we're going to see if I can get it in the XJ Dana 44 as well, because that's the overall plan. I want selectable lockers, front and rear, with factory style Dana 44 axles, because here's the long run plan. If this works, if I can build these, okay, these two axles together will have so much more value than the XJ Dana 44 by itself, because I can sell this as a package, just like the JK guys do with the JK axles. So selling a set of bolt-in ready axles for an XJ, and I can recoup some of that money. But the XJ Dana 44 by itself, it's got value, but not a whole lot, but it's got value. The Dana 30, if I had built that, it's got very little value. Most people do not buy beefed up Dana 30s. Some people do, but not many. You know, most of the time when somebody's considering replacing that front axle, it's to add major strength, not just buy one with parts already on it that they could have put on theirs. There's value there, but not a lot. The Dana 30 is not a good investment if I wanted to consider reselling it in the future. So if I wanted to go to 1 tons in the future, let's just say I got crazy and wanted to cut up my XJ and put it on 40s or 42s. Well, I'm going to need 1 ton axles. Well, with this plan, these are going to be valuable axles that I can sell and put that money towards that axle plan if I wanted to go 1 tons. Or maybe that I just wanted to go to the JK Dana 44s because they do have some strength advantages. They do have some width. They're wider than the factory TJ, LJ, XJ axles. So they got a cool stance, and there's some advantages there for that. There's also a lot more aftermarket support for those axles versus these older Dana 44s. While there's still a lot of support for them, the fact that the JK was such a popular platform, there's so many more parts available for those axles. So there's some advantages there. And for instance, like if we're talking axle shafts, well, the factory or even chromoly axle shafts that you can buy for this TJ LJ Dana 44, they have smaller axle shaft U joints than the JK axles. The JK axles go to the next size up. So there's a strength advantage. There's a lot of things that make the JK axles a little bit more desirable over these. And let's say I wanted to pursue that. Well, now I have a very valuable set of axles that I can sell to help get the money together to pay for those axles to build. So that's why this is a great option for my Jeep. I'm not saying this is the best option out there. I'm saying for my Jeep and my situation, this is a great build. Plus, it's just going to be very fun. I'm just going to get to try out some new things. I'm going to try to set up the ring and pinion myself. I paid to have it done on my Dana 30 and the XJ44. So I've already got 456 gears in there. They're already set up as thick gears. So they will work. They should work theoretically with these JK lockers because JK lockers are designed to not have a carrier brake. So they're designed in the same fashion that the 373 and numerically lower gear sets to fit on them. So that's why I also wanted to go with this, is because I think it will work with the gear set that I already have installed in my XJ Dana 44. So that's the project, guys. What do you think? I think it's going to be really cool. If anything, it's just going to be interesting to see if I can pull this off. Because if I can put these lockers in these older housings, so far I have not found anybody else that's done that. Not a single other person on the internet anywhere that I can find has documented doing this. Not saying that nobody else has done it. It's just nobody else has talked about how they done it. So either that means that just nobody talked about it, or I will be the first to try this. And I'm either going to fail or I'm going to succeed. So tell me what you guys think about this. I hope that you'll stick around and stick around through the whole build. If you think this is really interesting and this is your first time here, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and the little notification bell. And then that way you won't miss each and every single episode where we're going to go over this. And I'm also going to include in those episodes the trying to put the JK locker in the rear axle too. That'll probably be towards the end of the build. As if I can figure out if this locker will fit in this housing, then I'm almost 100% confident that it'll fit in that XJ Dana 44 housing as well. So that's it, guys. I'm going to leave it there today. Again, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I would love to have that subscriber count come up a little bit. I'm trying to hit that 1,000 subscribers. I'm hoping this project will help me get there. And then if you got any comments, please hit me in the comment section below. If you have any questions, or if you want to just tell me what you think of the build, even if you think it's stupid, because it could be stupid. I could be making a huge mistake here, and I don't know. But you're going to be right here along with me. I'm going to spend the money to either make a mistake or make something really cool. So anyways, thanks for tuning in, guys. I can't wait to see this project develop and show it off to you guys and show you what I'm doing. Thank you for tuning in again. And until next time, as always, keep Jeeping.